is the whole process of intent, integrity, and authorization piece. That's the big piece I really want to address in this interview.
I'm so glad that you tuned into that, because that's the key that unlocks everything else.
I'm Deepak Chopra. You're watching New Realities.
Welcome to New Realities. I'm Alan Steinfeld, and this program is about the evolution of consciousness. And somebody and his company and his wife have been so dedicated to who we are as consciousness, what it is to expand into the field, and how we can live better lives as human beings. Thrive 1 and Thrive 2 are essential components of a new paradigm of thinking.
In 2011, Thrive, What on Earth Will It Take? Became one of the most widely seen documentaries in history. It held the promise of a future that allows humanity to truly thrive. In 2020, Thrive 2, This Is What It Takes, delivers on that promise.
We heard from over 1,000 innovators from all over the world who told us about their technologies, inventions, and insights.
Our attention shifted from possibilities to results. The breakthroughs we saw were so profound that we knew we had to get this information out for others to see.
The test is successful.
Dude!
Thrive 2, This Is What It Takes.
I'm talking today to Foster Gamble. Thank you, Foster, for your work and dedication to truth, to the bigger picture. So let's start with Thrive 1, because I think you addressed the essential issues in Thrive 1. Where did you think you didn't go far enough in Thrive 1 that you had to make Thrive 2?
Well, we thought we would never make another documentary again, because it's just so much work and it's so stressful and expensive and everything. We thought we were done with Thrive 1, but Thrive 1 was a diagnosis, what's in the way of our thriving. And it presented a lot of hope for what's possible in energy and medicine and, how people self-organize and so forth. But it was mostly possibilities, and possibilities that were being suppressed. Then what happened was, after the movie came out, we were contacted by over 1,000 inventors from all over the world. And we spent five to 6 years off and on traveling around, meeting with the best ones that we had determined and seeing what was real. And what we saw, of course, most of them weren't what they hoped they were or claimed they were, or whatever, but still there were enough game changers that we saw that when we would share it with people, so many people are feeling so helpless and hopeless and depressed these days, and they'd hear these stories and go, wow, I feel proud to be human again. I feel some hope. And so Kimberly and I finally sat down with each other and said, okay, we have to share this with humanity so that people know the good news that's available, because the solutions are already here. And when people know that, it can not only lift their spirits, but then we can develop strategies that can actually take these things successfully out to the world.
Yeah, I thought it was an excellent presentation of the situation as it is. I also heard you had some flack about the UFO section, and I'm really pro UFO. I mean, the book I just wrote is about that, the environment, free energy, and the ability of this contact with the cosmos, I think, are the essential issues of our time.
Yeah,
and
exactly. And so it's no coincidence that those are the very ones that are being suppressed by that small but powerful cadre of sociopaths who don't want us to thrive. They want us to be, manageable or gone. so it's an easy way to tell what's the really juicy subjects. Is it's what they don't want you to be talking about.
Who are this group? Not that it matters, but who is it preventing us from knowing the truth? Who do you think is there. That's
Well, I think it does matter a lot. It most commonly you follow the money in any the suppression of any of these sectors, and it always leads back to the banking elite in Europe and in the U.S. And so it goes naturally to the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers because they've been working in collusion for almost 100 years in this plan to control the world. But it doesn't matter so much which individuals as what is their plan and what's the strategy to pull the wool over everybody's eyes. So it's concepts that we've been propagandized into believing, like somebody should have authority over us. And those people should be able to print money whenever they want. And those people should be able to tell us what we can do and what we can't do. Though the most dangerous thing of all is not these people, because they're getting exposed. They're going to be obsolete soon. The most dangerous thing is the belief of humanity in authority. If we think that people should be ruling over us, which the majority of people on the planet still do, then we not only allow them, we empower them, we vote for them, we give them our money, and then we excuse them when they do all this horrible stuff. Well, that's got to stop. And that is turning around now. I'm very hopeful.
Well, that is the most radical part of Thrive 2 is the anti-authoritarianism. And and at first it's a little scary. Well, who's in control here? But, I think I'll get to that, but I think you preface the whole thing by talking about integrity. Unless we have integrity,
yes,
authority is going to rule over us with a lack of integrity. If each of us has integrity, then we don't need the authorities. But if we're not taught that, and we can go into what it means to be integrity, then that whole last part of the film just looks like anarchy.
Well, let me challenge you on a couple of things there, because this is the crux of the conversation. Yeah. If I had to depend on 7 to 8 billion people getting enlightened in order for humanity to survive, I would be very depressed. Yeah. So I don't think we need everyone enlightened. I think we need a critical mass awake. And then I think that we need an enlightened rule, a guideline for our behavior, that when people step out of line with that, there are natural processes which will correct that, which will keep them from harming other people, which will make them have to give retribution to anyone that they have offended against and so forth. And that rule, because I'm not a big fan of rules, but there's a fundamental natural morality in traveling all over the world. The one thing that I've found that every single human being that I've ever met agrees to, it's tough to find agreement with your family about where to go for dinner or not. Imagine trying to get all of humanity to agree on something. Well, there is one thing, and that is that nobody wants to be violated against their will. Yeah. So what if that's the basis for a universal morality? Not only, you would understand this better than anyone, a basis of not only a global morality, but a cosmic morality. So when ETs are visiting and so forth, no matter how impressive they are with their advanced capabilities and so forth, we don't want them trying to subjugate us. We shouldn't be trying to subjugate them. It's a matter of, okay, how can we allow one another to do their thing, to live their life, as long as they're not living it in violation of anyone else?
Well, that's where it does get a little tricky, because let's say I want to carry a gun. I want to smoke in a crowded room. I mean, that's my free right. I mean, it gets very tricky. Who's to say what is allowed? How do we judge the morality? I mean, what is the absolute morality? I just want to do what I want to do, and it's my right, and you can't tell me. And it may infringe, or, it's a very fine line to decide what the moral issue is. And so how do we decide? Who's the decider of morality?
I really appreciate that question, because this is at the basis of all of it. This is what I've really dedicated the rest of my life to communicating to humanity, because I spent the last 20 years trying to figure it out. And in the process, I discovered it was more and more and more good news, that it actually, there's this coherent morality, and it's all based on the non-aggression principle, which says that no one is allowed to initiate force against anyone else except in true self-defense. You know, someone's running at you with a buzzsaw, of course you can defend yourself. But otherwise, you cannot initiate force against anyone else. Now, most people say, well, sure, I agree with that. That's just the golden rule. But then they turn right around and insist on having a government, and every government is dependent on taking your money, usually against your will, and therefore, at the very crux of every government, it is immoral. And that's why we have, throughout history, every single government has been corrupt, not by coincidence, not because of failures of human nature, but because the corruption is built into the very notion of having a few people being given the right to rule over others. So if you take that non-aggression principle, then you need to unpack it. And that's what you're asking for. And so when you go to, okay, well, what's moral and what's not? The basis of the non-aggression principle is really clear and obvious, and then there are gray zones. So the basis of it is no assault, no rape, no murder, no theft, and no fraud. It's as simple as that. No, you can't do those 5 things. And anyone who wants to try to argue for being able to do that, any of those 5 things, I'm happy to debate them anytime. That's where you know you have an immoral person. Now, that's what the rulers of today are doing. They have, you know, throughout history, the kings, the priests, the dictators, the presidents, the premiers, they've all done those things, but now they're having to hide behind this this facade of government, of democracy, in order to do what the kings and dictators have been doing all along. So that's the obvious part of morality. The less obvious part is the gray zones, like, okay, if my neighbor's playing their music too loud, they're not hitting me, they're not stealing my money, right, but they're invading my space in some way. So it all comes down to private property and ownership of self. A lot of people these days are uncomfortable in this days of re-emerging socialism, are uncomfortable with the notion of private property. Well, is your body your own?
Yeah.
Because if it's not, then rape is fine. And I wouldn't want to be around any of those people. If you own your body, then do you own the fruits of your labor? Do you own the house that you earned by working for it and so forth? So then you get into the gray zones of environmental. The traditional non-aggression principle just has to do with human beings. Kimberly and I really extend this, and we've been working with environmentalists for 30 years on this. We extend it into that you can't violate other individuals or ecosystems. Now that gets into a gray zone, which we've been exploring a lot and working with high-level thinkers in this area. And what it comes down to is that, of course, every human being, in order to survive, needs to alter its environment. You know, you need resources from the soil and from the trees, but you know, those meat eaters from the animals, but for everybody on vegetables and fruits. So you're consuming from your environment. You can do that without destroying the ecosystem. And we learned a lot from Yvonne Peter, the youngest ever chief of the Nitsai-Gwich'in tribe up in Alaska, who was in Thrive 1. And he said, you know, we've lived in harmony with our surroundings and with the caribou and the seal for thousands of years. We do take their lives in order to survive, and with great reverence, but we honor the herd the whole time. That's what I think we need to learn to do in the gray zones, is just sort it out. How do we take care of the fisheries, of the soil, of the air, and so forth? But those are more subtle points that will emerge out of natural precedent. But the fundamental principle that we're missing is obvious once you see it.
I agree. And some of the issues that you brought up is, first of all, fraud. Do we have judges? There's always 2 sides of a fraud case. And like, yes, we don't want, I mean, the other things I believe with rape, killing, stealing, that's very clear cut. But in the legal realms, that's one thing. The other thing, if we're not giving our money to the government, not that I'm in favor of that, how do we provide social services, hospitals, subways, all the things that we depend on money, not building a huge industrial complex, but how do we get what we need as a population?
Well, these are the great questions, and I consider them to be so important that I'm about 2/3 of the way through a book about exactly this. And I have a show called The Freedom Portal on Saturdays on the internet, and this whole last month we've been devoting those. I've been bringing in experts and sharing my own research, answering these very same questions. And fundamentally, I think that it boils down to 18 questions. It's an unlimited set of unknowns. And so there's, who's going to take care of the roads? Who's going to take care of the sick, the poor? Who's going to educate the children and so forth? So these are all really good and important questions. The good news is that the evidence is in that the more we handle those issues through a free market, a truly free market of voluntary exchange with independent dispute resolution organizations, independent security, independent insurance, independent health care providers, what happens is people get more and more prosperous, and people are taken care of much better in that sort of free system than they are in the history of any government system. So the more we go toward the natural freedom that we're all seeking, the good news is it's safer, it's more prosperous, it's more healthy, people are happier. There's a book called The Economic Freedom of the World Report that comes out every year that ranks all of this for every nation in the world. And I've been looking at that one for 15 years, and it's just consistent. The more politically and economically free people are, the happier, more thriving, and more healthy they are.
So you're saying we have to depend on those with money to support those that may be less abundant. Is that sort of the basis of what you're saying? I mean, nothing wrong with it, but that's where integrity comes in. I have, $10 billion. I want to keep that, or do I want to share it?
I think it's not quite the first question to ask. I think the first question is, what would it take to have a thriving situation where people weren't suffering in the numbers that they are now? And the cause of virtually all of the suffering, poverty, starvation, all that stuff right now is government itself, which is creating the fake money, which is siphoning all the wealth up to, the 0.001% and so forth. The problem is that we need to recognize these destructive systems and restore the wholeness of natural systems. So ultimately, though it's hard for people to imagine right now, in the early days of the colonies in the US, there were no homeless people. People were taking care of each other. People were free. They had a natural currency, and it was just a prosperous society. So that will ultimately be there one day. In the meantime, it's a very humanitarian question. Okay, what do we do about the most disadvantaged people while we're transitioning from here to there? And that's in Thrive 1, we lay out a 3-phase strategy where the first phase really recognizes the best of kind of the liberal philosophy of let's use government taxation to take care of people. Mm-hmm. So, okay, we're going to move toward a society where there's no government, no taxation. But meanwhile, instead of fighting wars, and paying fake interest to the Federal Reserve, there's plenty of money not only to recover the United States, but to recover the entire world just from cutting the military budget in half and eliminating the Federal Reserve. So that's going to handle the first part of the transition. I kind of picture somebody like, Cynthia McKinney or Dennis Kucinich being a great political leader in that transition. In the next phase, I picture someone like Ron Paul, because now you're shrinking government, you're stopping wars of foreign aggression, you're going to natural currency, you're using government only to protect individual rights and some aspects of the commons. So that would be a good kind of traditional conservative second phase. As that's happening, it's going to be so successful. This has been proven all throughout history. If you allow that to continue, people are ultimately going to say, well, why would we hang on to any government at all, since that gives a few people rights that other people don't have, and that always creates the next regime. So ultimately, I think that'll be the third stage, will be actually letting go of government, because people will have seen that independent dispute resolution, like is happening already. Over 90% of civil cases in the US are being resolved through independent arbitration or mediation. And same thing with security. There are more independent peace officers in the United States by far than there are government police. People don't recognize it. So we're naturally going there anyway. It's just a matter of recognizing what Martin Luther King said when he said the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice. You look back into the pharaohs and the dictators and all that kind of stuff. We've come a long way, but what is it that we're following? We're following this beacon of freedom. That's what America was. And unfortunately, we've almost lost it now. It's almost gone to tyranny. Again, they've been, there's the same scoundrels that have been working on getting rid of our freedom for 200 years, well, at least 100 years. And they've almost got it. So this is literally the struggle for our lives globally to wake up to the key that unlocks all of this is individual sovereignty.
Yes, I totally agree. We need control over our own lives and finances. When I make money, I don't want to give it away to something I don't even know where it's going, or a military budget. I love what you're saying, and I totally support it any way I can, but I would like to think that we need some other steps that are happening now, a decentralization, a moving out of these massive urban populations that don't care about the people on the street or the homeless. So when we start to decentralize, which I think this last year was a kind of doorway towards, then I think we can start to build the basis of decentralized but unified through technology interactions and power. We can start to gain power in local groups that are harder to gain when we're in huge urban developments that don't care about individuals. So you're bringing back integrity.
I really agree with you on that. And what I see happening, if we're successful, we can back off from this waterfall that we're about to go over into globalism, where these sociopaths want to centralize power on the entire planet. We go back from that to the sovereignty of nation states. Now, I don't believe in government, so I don't believe in nation states, but it's better than globalism because you've at least got decentralized nation states that can come to each other's rescue in a Hitler, Mao, Pol Pot, Stalin type of situation. But then you get rid of the nations and you go back to localize, you go back to states. And then you get rid of states and you go back to local cities and counties and so forth. And then ultimately you'll just have free people following the non-aggression principle, organizing in associations, clubs, institutions, and so forth, which handle everything that we hope the government is going to take care of, and they don't. All those things, the roads and security and education, that can all be handled by independent institutions much better than we, rather than wondering when the government is going to take our small remaining liberties.
Do you believe then in group consensus? If we're living in small colonies, because democracy doesn't care about 49% of the population.
I don't believe in democracy, and I don't believe in consensus. I believe in consensus if you're having sex. You should each consent. I believe in consensus. If you're making a business deal, the deal shouldn't go forward unless everybody agrees. But I don't believe in using consensus in order to make some kind of decision that then gets imposed on the so-called group.
So how do we make decisions if we're living in a collective community? Okay, our community needs this food versus that food. How do these simple decisions unfold?
Well, it's done by the more desire there is for a road. A bunch of people have built houses or businesses out in some area, and a good road is needed. Well, those people are going to get together. Those businesses, the individuals are going to get together, and they're going to put up money and hire somebody who builds roads, and then the road is there, and then people get to use the road. So it happens naturally through individual needs and independent organizations who not only have to compete with each other in terms of price and in terms of reliability, but they're going to be held to account for non-violation of the non-aggression principle. So if some company starts defrauding others or destroying the environment or raising an army to go take over another company or something like that, immediately they'll be held to account in one of these independent dispute resolution organizations. We're so used to this monolithic daddy state or nanny state, being the supposed savior for all of our problems. But, we didn't even have an income tax before 1913. And the 19th century was the most prosperous of all, and the most free of all. It was the shining light, the beacon on the hill for the entire world. And then they came in with the IRS and the Federal Reserve, and we've lost 98% of our purchasing power of what you work for every day has been disappeared very intentionally since that time. So that's number one. We need to get our power back, politically, financially, and then have access to the cancer cures and the free energy and all the amazing creativity and humanity.
The big question, the hard question is the forces that are opposing us. I agree with everything you're saying. It would be a much better world. So what do we have to break down? What has to collapse or change? Because this is you have the answers, but there's a blockade in the road. It's great. I see the Green Valley beyond. It's beautiful, but we're not there and we're not close to getting there. I'd like us to be, but how do we break down what's there and get to what we want in this vision of a thriving world?
Yeah. In this last month in the Freedom Portal, we had 3 shows. And the first show, I laid out the history of freedom thinking. And then our next show was, okay, how could it possibly work? And I've just talked about a bunch of that. And then the third show, and like you say, this is the most difficult thing of all, is how do we get from there? And nobody knows for sure. It's like the free market, like the weather. It's going to be the result of trillions of individual transactions, individual acts of creativity and humanity, but moving toward this principle of freedom. And for me, the very first step is education. And that's why I've devoted my life and resources to educating people through this myth of authority and back into the state of natural freedom. So education is number one, and more people are waking up, especially through all these lockdowns and business closures and so forth during this global scourge. And I'm not referring to the pandemic. I'm referring to the forces that are using this so-called pandemic to try to complete their lunge for a one world government. We've gotten to see more and more people are waking up. Most of the liberals of my friends, when they argue for a bigger government and so forth, I ask them, what are your major sources of information? And it's like, well, CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post, John Oliver and Trevor Noah. So that's where they're getting all of their information from. And you're not going to get to see an alternative to socialism and communism if that's all you're seeing. CNN has been so diluted now by the propagandizing that they're doing that they're down to about between 1.5 and 1.7 million viewers a day. Mm-hmm. I have half a dozen friends who have podcasts that are 4, 5, 10 times that. Mm-hmm. But you're not going to hear that on the mainstream news. They don't want you to know that. There is this myth that the mainstream is still mainstream.
And the voice of authority as well.
That's right. And so that's why they're rushing now. They're literally crashing into getting the New World Order, the Agenda 2030, the Great Reset, whatever you want to call it. They're rushing to get it before people wake up. And people are waking up by the hundreds of millions. Thrive One was just even as of a year ago, was the most widely seen documentary in history.
Wow.
Now it's over 91 million views, and we didn't even have an advertising budget. This is how hungry for people are to understand what's in the way of our thriving and what can we do about it.
If we can just break it down a little simply, I mean, you're covering so much. And if people haven't seen Thrive 1 or Thrive 2, especially, I recommend it. Let's just break down the barriers in the way. I mean, and what we can do to overcome. Education, media, that will be in our corner. The freedom of media, the freedom of voices being heard outside the mainstream. But what are those specific powers in the way, those roles? I mean, just the politicians, but be specific. What has to happen in order for those things to dissolve, to make the way for exactly the vision you're talking about?
Well, I think it's going to come down to how do we best defend our rights? Because I'm not interested in shutting down some TV station or some newspaper because I don't like their point of view. That would be fascism in and of itself. Right. And the left does it and the right does it. But that's been intentional on the part of the globalists. They have been pitting communism and fascism against each other for 2 centuries to try to accomplish this thing. So it's not like I prefer one side to the other. We just need to create alternatives based on the truth and based on free choice. So you have truth media outlets, you have true school choice, and you have homeschooling and unschooling and all that type of thing. You have true food choice and agricultural choice. If people want to create a little fascist community or a little communist community, that's fine. They go off and do that with whoever wants to be under that sort of regime, but they don't get to do it to the rest of it. But people believe in it if it's global or national in scale. So just one by one, we need to reclaim each area. And when the powers that be come for us, just like they're doing with censorship on the internet right now, we need to be, I'm an old martial artist. I've taught and trained Aikido for 15 years. So you need to be clear in your center. You need to be centered, but you need to be able to move your center as well, so you're not vulnerable to attack. So, for instance, we're about to launch our new solutions hub. And for that, we need our own servers. We need our own cybersecurity. We need to be ready to make it obvious, to have them fall all over themselves and get exposed to the world if they try to shut down our truth. And so it's those sorts of steps. Same thing with schools. If they try to come and shut down your school and put you back into government propaganda stuff, if they try to come for you, then we need to know how to defend ourselves. And I specialize in nonviolent self-defense. So I like to use the media, and I like to use, bullhorns and protests and divestments and all of that stuff. That in the Solutions Hub, we'll be teaching techniques for that. We've been training people all over the world for the last 13 years, and they've been very successful in getting rid of glyphosates in Hawaii and stopping toxic spray in California and getting GMOs labeled in Colorado. We've got techniques that are nonviolent, based on the non-aggression principle, but very effective in that they bring the skills of science and media and spirituality and relationship and health and so forth. They bring those expert skills all to bear on any particular problem. So that you use the media, you file lawsuits, you expose politicians and so forth. And if they're not aligned with the truth, with the natural energy of the unified field, they will dissolve away, or they'll be exposed in the process and lose their power. That's what's happening right now.
No, I like what you're saying about the natural energy of the unified field, because I was going to ask you, who is the arbitrator of truth? It doesn't seem, even if you look at the alternative media, there's an agenda. There is agendas behind media, whatever those media outlets are. So I have not heard the truth except for what I think is the truth. And so that's one aspect. Who's the arbitrator and how? Because any interpretation of the natural field is an interpretation. There is a natural order, but it comes through our filter. So that's one thing. The other thing is we all have our rights, but do some people have a right for to bear arms, guns? Is that part of a human right, or is that part of the self-defense? I know you go back to that basic principle, but people feel, I'm not one of them, but people feel they have a right to protect themselves because there's so much chaos out there. So just break it down a little bit, and then I have one kind of final question.
Yeah, no, these are great. I'm so glad you do what you do, Alan, because you're genuinely curious. You ask great questions that go right to the heart of the matter. And in relation to truth, we've got a couple of generations now that are coming out of college deeply indoctrinated into postmodernism, which says there is no truth, into Marxism, to social Marxism, which says, do anything, lie, cheat, steal, kill, whatever it is to make sure that we're in power. And the young people are so confused. I say that there is knowable truth. And that's what philosophy is supposed to be. That's what science is supposed to be. And that's why the politicians have and the corporations have taken over science, right, and they've distorted it for their own purposes. And that's why in the schools they have literally eliminated critical thinking or any philosophy that goes to natural logic. So in terms of truth, I would ask people who are out there going, well, it makes sense to me that everybody's just got their own truth. Yeah, you do have your own experience, and you're free to interpret things however you want, but you're not free to then impose something on someone else. So I would ask people, is 2 and 2 4? And if you think it's not, boy, you have been deeply indoctrinated, or your math just stinks. Right, or if you think that rape is okay, because in some countries it is. There are countries where rape of children is okay on Thursdays after 7 p.m.
Right.
It's like, well, okay, well, that's a law, man. They made it legal. So is that moral?
No, but Absolutely. We're not talking about those basic, I think, logical math and invasion of that personal space. But then it gets subtle about truth. Should we go to war? Of course, that's government thing.
Well, exactly. This is the process. What you're going through right now. We have a section in Thrive 2 where we scroll with some of Gary's music in the background. We scroll a partial list of what goes away when government disappears. And virtually every problem that we think is intractable, or we think if we can only get our political party in control, then we'll be able to have it our way. Virtually all of those things go away. Like, yeah, war goes away. We would not be having war. The only way you get war is when you've got some sort of totalitarian state who is taxing and then using that tax to, it used to be that they would literally kidnap kids and put them in the army. They've had to be a little more subtle, but it's still the same game. When you don't have that tax base, of course, you're going to have people misbehaving with their neighbors, but that gets sorted out, in a civil court, in a dispute resolution organization. But most of these big ones literally go away if you have the truth of private property and self-ownership, and then you have the non-aggression principle. With those two, the whole universe opens up, especially when we're in contact with extraterrestrial.
Well, exactly. That's part of it. But what's even bigger obstacle, even than the governments, are religions and traditions. So, because what you're saying about anti-authority means that we're taking the king away or the president, and there's no substitute for God on earth, which was what the kings were. They were royalty because that was the real reality. So if there's no king, no one to be in charge, then it gives the spirit back to us. There's no outward deity because there's no externalization of it. Each of us becomes the divine sovereign of our own being, right? So that's a spiritual benefit of what you're saying. But the obstacle is, how do we get people beyond their rituals, their beliefs, their dogmas, and their religion?
I think one of the most important things we can do is inspect our questions. And this question, how do we get people to do something? That's the problem. Right. People have a right to believe whatever they want. They just don't have a right to then do a crusade that tries to impose their religion on someone else. So if someone expresses their Judaism, or they are a follower of Muhammad or whatever, that's fine with me. I mean, it's not my particular path. I prefer having no middleman, But in each of those cases, there were some very enlightened beings who woke up a lot of people before the politicians and the rulers, took their version of religion over for their own reason. But I think that our biggest challenge is, how do we get along with billions of other humans when we don't agree?
Right.
And it seems like such a vast problem. Fortunately, looking into it for 20 years, the answer is really simple. You allow people to do and believe whatever they want, as long as they don't violate people. And that's when the law comes in. But that's natural law. That's not legislation cooked up by a bunch of crooked politicians.
All right. So there is room for individual traditions and and
Totally.
beliefs. Yeah.
Sure.
All right. So the final question, or sort of as we're wrapping up, because thank you for your time, and I know you're saying important things that need to be said to a lot of people. So
Thanks.
Hopefully this will be out there. Let's say we accomplish everything you're talking about. No government. People live by the universal laws, and there's abundance. There's free energy. That gets us to a level playing field, right? So what then is the purpose of incarnation? We've been struggling 10,000 years just to get there. Once we get there, then what was the purpose of existence, I guess, is the ultimate question.
That may be the biggest question I've ever been asked. What do we do after we're in a totally free society, and what's the purpose of incarnation? But I love it. So let me take a cut at it. When we're in this free, stateless society, first of all, I encourage people to just close your eyes and imagine for a moment. You wake up into a healthy body with wonderful relationships. And as you're walking down the street, you're seeing people just lit up. Their eyes are glowing because they're going to visit people that they love, or they're going to do work that is a fulfillment of their purpose. They sit down to a meal, and the food is just radiant with nutrition. I could go on and on when they get home to their lovers and so forth, but I'll leave that to your imagination. But most fundamentally, we don't know. It's hard for us to even imagine. Fundamentally, what would happen would be creativity would be unleashed.
Yes.
And I believe we would be welcomed into the cosmic community for the first time. I think that's what they're waiting for. I think that they're trying to, and there's a lot of evidence of this, that, a lot of people might not be aware of it, but I'm sure you are. There's a lot of evidence that we are being helped out by not only interdimensional, but physical incarnate beings from other places in the cosmos. They can't do our evolution for us, but they're here to help us survive, like we would if we were a parent with a toddler on the swings or the jungle gym. They need to learn to climb. We need to learn to climb ourselves, but they're trying to keep us from blowing ourselves up with nuclear weapons and so forth in the meantime. So I think creativity unleashed and just love and love and love and love in this new world. And then the answer to your second question is, I think that the purpose of evolution is for the universe to know itself. Mm-hmm. So as the atoms became molecules, became cells, became plants, became animals, became humans, what's happening is we're building on each previous stage of evolution and accruing capabilities. And you see now in humans, we're able to ask these questions. We're able to look out into the cosmos and go, wow, who are we? Where are we? And what are we doing here? And this is why I think it's the most exciting time I can imagine to be alive, because we are literally at that fork in the road between, what Bucky called oblivion or utopia right now. And I think that the non-aggression principle is the key to utopia. In terms of our individual incarnation, this month, what we're doing on the Freedom Portal is where health freedom meets artificial intelligence, because it's a major challenge what's coming with AI and whole agenda of putting nanobots in and controlling us with 5G and taking over and owning the electronics in our bodies and so forth. It has tremendous potential for augmentation, for healing, for exploring the cosmos and so forth, but also huge potential risk for literally us being persuaded or forced to turn over our consciousness to machines. I think as human beings right now, the purpose of our incarnation is to fulfill the potential, what Arthur Young called the octave of conscious evolution, to fulfill our potential as, to bring the Christ consciousness, whatever you want to call it, that level 49, the highest that you can contain within a human body, within the corporal antenna. I think our purpose as humans is to fulfill our potential to be in harmony with the cosmos, in love with ourselves and others and with our environment, and then to take that next step in conscious evolution of realizing who we are as the boundless unified field of love and consciousness itself.
Beautiful. That is what, no, I appreciate that, because what you said there is the passion that you have for those possibilities is what you're putting in so much into creating the solutions. And I really appreciate you standing up for humanity, because it's selfless. I mean, it's not, you could probably just go off and be happy and not worry about, I mean, you seem to be, you have it together, and now you're putting back into the world. So I think, though, the answer when I was thinking about the question, I think we're here to create. I think that's our ultimate purpose as human beings. And it's to create, because when we create, we help others feel more. A purpose of our incarnation is to extend the realm of experience, and experience gives us more feeling. So after we achieve, after we thrive, like you've laid out, we're here to make known the unknown. We're here to give and explore existence. And I think that is the flowering of humanity that you have envisioned. And so thank you for your time and your effort.
Thank you, Alan. It is really a pleasure and an honor to get to have this kind of conversation with you. And thank you for the invitation and sharing it out into the world.
We'll meet sometime, because I think there's so much more that is coming to you, that's unfolding, and like perspectives of insight and like downloads. And, there's a higher directive that is running through the Thrive movement.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate that recognition, especially coming from you. Yeah, we're just riding a big wave here.
And it's fun. This is the most exciting, I think you said that, this is the most exciting time in human history, because it is all converging. The ETs, the economics, the collapse of society, the emergence of the individual, and the possibility for a really beautiful future. So thank you. I've been talking to Foster Gamble, who's one of the co-creators of Thrive 1 and 2, produced and directed by Kimberly Gamble. It is a doorway that will launch us into new realities. So I really feel touched that some individuals are looking out for the collective consciousness of the planet with new ideas, not the same old story, but a new story. So thank you, Foster, for your efforts here.